Hello, welcome to Heavy Storytelling. Welcome to Heavy Storytelling. Hope you guys enjoy. Make sure like button, subscribe to this video. My tongue is already twisted today. We are gonna be reading a story, but first we are gonna be reading the Bible. Then we're going to be doing synopsis with my brother this time. Then we're going to be reading Great Expectations. There this time. Hope you guys enjoy. Dad's gonna be coming up right now to read John chapter 8.
Hello! I'm so pleased to see you today. We're on John chapter 8. This is the English Standard Version. Let me get started. Oh, by the way, it starts on 7:53, chapter 7, verse 53. If you're keeping track, which is exactly 7 words, but that is the last verse of chapter 7. They went each to his own house. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in their midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground, and as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground, but when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more." Again Jesus spoke to them, saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So the Pharisees said to him, "You are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true." Jesus answered, "Even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I come from and where I am going. But you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true. For it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the testimony of 2 people is true. I am the one who bears witness about myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness about me." They said to him, therefore, "Where is your Father?" Jesus answered, "You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also." These words he spoke in the treasury, as he taught in the temple, but no one arrested him, because his hour had not yet come. So he said to them again, "I am going away, and you will seek me, and you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come." So the Jews said, "Will he kill himself, since he says, 'Where I am going, you cannot come'?" He said to them, "You are from below. I am from above. You are of this world. I am not of this world. I told you that you would die in your sins, for unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins." So they said to him, "Who are you?" Jesus said to them, "Just what I have been telling you from the beginning. I have much to say about you, and much to judge, but he who sent me is true, and I declare to the world what I have heard from him." They did not understand that he had been speaking to them about the Father. So Jesus said to them, "When you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own authority, but speak just as the Father taught me. And he who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do the things that are pleasing to him." As he was saying these things, many believed in him. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are offspring of Abraham, and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? Jesus answered them, Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are offspring of Abraham, yet you seek to kill me because my word finds no place in you. I speak of what I have seen with my Father, and you do what you have heard from your father. They answered him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said to them, If you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You are doing the works your father did. They said to him, We were not born of sexual immorality. We have one Father, even God. Jesus said to them, If God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God, and I am here. I came not of my own accord, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot bear to hear my word. You are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is of God hears the words of God. The reason why you do not hear them is that you are not of God. The Jews answered him, Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Jesus answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. The Jews said to him, Now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, and as did the prophets. Yet you say, If anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died, and the prophets died? Who do you make yourself out to be? Jesus answered, If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say, He is our God. But you have not known him. I know him. If I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. So the Jews said to him, You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. That's the end of John chapter 8, excuse me. I saw the 9, which is the next chapter. And so, all right. So what happened in the last chapter is that Ms. Havisham gave them some money, and they were so overcome with just being rejoicing that they accidentally, Pip and Mr. Joe, fell off of a wall and died. And that's the end of the story. Oh, why? JJ says, why do they always have to die? So here is someone new to give you what really happened.
Okay, so I'm not really new. It's just been a while since I've been on. So, hi for those of you. It's Daniel. I know I look a lot different since last time. Anyway, I'm doing the synopsis. So, without further ado, right? Basically, what happened last chapter was so Pip and Joe received the money from Miss Havisham. It was 25. What?
25 pounds.
25 pounds? Okay.
25 guinea.
Yeah, 25 guinea. I don't. It's like
Yeah, we don't really understand British money.
But yeah, no, they received the 25 guinea, and Joe received it, and he gave it to Mrs. Joe because, just because. And, so, meanwhile, Pip is like he's a blacksmith, and he doesn't really like the job because he doesn't want him to be seen by Estella, like, looking through, I don't know, like a window or something. He doesn't want to be embarrassed by, Estella looking at him, and yeah. And then, basically he goes to Mr. What's his name?
No, he goes to Miss Havisham's house.
Yeah, he goes to Miss Havisham's house, and, he's going to see Estella, but, Estella wasn't there, so she thanks Miss Havisham, for, like, getting him into what he's, the blacksmith, work. And, what was I gonna say? He goes to Mr.
Bumblechook.
He goes to Mr. Bumblechook's house, and, what happens there again?
They just have a good time,
They
and
just-
then
yeah.
they go home.
Yeah, they have a good time, they go home, and, Mrs. Joe is on the floor, like, there's, like, a ton of people at the house, and, like, we think she's dead, so, yeah. Alright, see ya.
Hello, I'm back! I wanted to say that I was on the YouTube channel today, and I noticed that we have 5 new followers on the YouTube channel in the last month, and that totals 102. Now, I don't go on the YouTube channel very much. I just upload the videos every once in a while because it's a more permanent platform than Facebook. It's easier to navigate and all that and everything. But when I do go, I just, look over at the, I forget what they call it, all the statistics and stuff. And so I noticed that we have over 100 followers now on the YouTube channel. So that's exciting. Still, the #1 video is Mara #1 and the Twice Freed #1. Those are the 2 biggest hitters for the YouTube channel. All right, so with over 1,000 each, Mara #1 I think is in 1,400 something, and I didn't see what Twice Freed #1 is. Anyway, meaning #1 meaning the first episode of that, and those 2 books get a lot of videos, I think, because probably homeschool families are watching these. So I appreciate kudos to you guys. I hope y'all are enjoying the story. Right now we're following Pip and his great expectations. We're on chapter 16. Let me get started. With my head full of George Barnwell, I was at first disposed to believe that I must have had some hand in the attack upon my sister, or at all events that at her near relation, popularly known to be under obligations to her, I was a more legitimate object of suspicion than anyone else. But when, in the clearer light of next morning, I began to reconsider the matter, and to hear it discussed around me on all sides, I took another view of the case, which was more reasonable. Joe had been at the Three Jolly Bargemen, smoking his pipe from 8:15 to 10:15. While he was there, my sister had been seen standing at the kitchen door and had exchanged good night with a farm laborer going home. The man could not be more particular as to the time at which he saw her. He got into dense confusion when he tried to be. The man could not be more particular as to the time at which he saw her. He got into dense confusion when he tried to be, then that it must have been before 9. That's a weird sentence. Anyway, when Joe went home at 5 minutes before 10, he found her struck down on the floor and promptly called in 911. Assistance. Sorry, there was no 911 in England. Probably not even now. Anyway, all right. The fire had not then burnt unusually low, nor was the snuff of the candle very long. The candle, however, had been blown out. Nothing had been taken away from any part of the house, neither beyond the blowing out of the candle which stood on a table between the door and my sister, and was behind her when she stood facing the fire and was struck. Was there any disarrangement of the kitchen excepting such as she herself had made in falling and bleeding? But there was one remarkable piece of evidence on the spot. She had been struck with something blunt and heavy on the head and spine after the blows were dealt. Something heavy had been thrown down at her with considerable violence as she lay on her face, and on the ground beside her, when Joe picked her up, was a convict's leg iron which had been filed asunder. Now Joe, examining this iron with a smith's eye, declared it to have been a file asunder some time ago. The hue and cry going off to the hulks, and people coming thence to examine the iron, Joe's opinion was corroborated. They did not undertake to say when it had left the prison ships, to which it undoubtedly had once belonged, but they claimed to know for certain that the particular manacle had been worn by either of the two convicts who had escaped last night. Further, one of those two was already retaken and had not freed himself of his iron. Knowing what I knew, I set up an inference of my own here. I believed the iron to be my convict's iron, the iron I had seen and heard him filing at on the marshes, but my mind did not accuse him of having put it to its latest use, for I believed one of two other persons to have become possessed of it, and to have turned it to this cruel account, either Orlick or the strange man who had shown me the file. Now as to Orlick, he had gone to town exactly as he told us when we picked him up at the turnpike. He had been seen about town all evening. He had been in divers companies in several public houses, and he had come back with myself and Mr. Wopsle. There was nothing against him save the quarrel, and my sister had quarrelled with him, and with everybody else about her 10,000 times. As to the strange man, if he had come back for his 2 banknotes, there could have been no dispute about them, because my sister was fully prepared to restore them. Besides, there had been no altercation. The assailant had come in so silently and suddenly that she had been felled before she could look around. It was horrible to think that I had provided the weapon, however undesignedly, but I could hardly think otherwise. I suffered unspeakable trouble while I considered and reconsidered whether I should at last dissolve that spell of my childhood and tell Joe all the story. For months afterward, I every day settled the question finally in the negative, and reopened and re-argued it next morning. The contention came, after all, to this. The secret was such an old one now, had grown into me and become a part of myself, that I could not tear it away. In addition to the dread that, having led up to so much mischief, it would be now more likely than ever to alienate Joe from me if he believed it, I had a further restraining dread that he would not believe it, but would assort it with the fabulous dogs and veal cutlets as a monstrous invention. However, I temporized with myself, of course, for was I not wavering between right and wrong when the thing is always done, and resolved to make a full disclosure if I should see any such new occasion as a new chance of helping in the discovery of the assailant? The constables and the Bow Street men from London, for this happened in the days of the extinct red waistcoated police, were about the house for a week or two, and did pretty much what I have heard and read of like authorities doing in other such cases. They took up several obviously wrong people, and they ran their heads very hard against wrong ideas, and persisted in trying to fit their circumstances to the ideas, instead of trying to extract ideas from the circumstances. Although they stood about the door of the Jolly Bargeman with knowing and reserved looks that filled the whole neighborhood with admiration, and they had a mysterious manner of taking their drink that was almost as good as taking the culprit, but not quite, for they never did it. Long after these constitutional powers had dispersed, my sister lay very ill in bed. Her sight was disturbed so that she saw objects multiplied and grasped at visionary teacups and wine glasses instead of the realities. Her hearing was greatly impaired, her memory also, and her speech was unintelligible. When at last she came round so far as to be helped downstairs, it was still unnecessary to keep my slate always by her. It was still necessary to keep my slate always by her, that she might indicate in writing what she could not indicate in speech. As she was, very bad handwriting apart, a more than indifferent speller, and as Joe was a more than indifferent reader, extraordinary complications arose between them, which I was always called in to solve. The administration of mutton instead of medicine, the substitution of tea for Joe, and the baker for bacon were among the mildest of my own mistakes. However, her temper was greatly improved, and she was patient. A tremulous uncertainty of the action of all her limbs soon became a part of her regular state, and afterward, as intervals of 2 or 3 months, she would often put her hand to her head, and would then remain for about a week at a time in some gloomy aberration of mind. We were at a loss to find a suitable attendant for her, until a circumstance happened conveniently to relieve us. Mr. Wopsle's great aunt conquered a confirmed habit of living into which she had fallen, and Biddy became a part of our establishment. It may have been about a month after my sister's reappearance in the kitchen when Biddy came to us with a small speckled box containing the whole of her worldly effects, and became a blessing to the household. Above all, she was a blessing to Joe, for the dear old fellow was sadly cut up by the constant contemplation of the wreck of his wife, and had been accustomed, while attending on her of an evening, to turn to me every now and then and say, with his blue eyes moistened, "Such a fine figure of a woman as she once were, Pip," Biddy instantly taking the cleverest charge of her as though she had studied her from infancy. Joe became able in some sort to appreciate the greater quiet of his life, and to get down to the Jolly Bargeman now and then for a change that did him good. It was characteristic of the police people that they had all more or less suspected poor Joe, though he never knew it, and that they had to a man concurred in regarding him as one of the deepest spirits they had ever encountered. Biddy's first triumph in her new office was to solve a difficulty that had completely vanquished me. I had tried hard at it, but had made nothing of it. Thus it was. Again and again and again my sister had traced upon the slate a character that looked like a curious tea, and then with the utmost eagerness had called our attention to it as something she particularly wanted. I had in vain tried everything producible that began with a T, from tar to toast and tub. At length it came to my head that the sign looked like a hammer, and on my lustily calling out that word in my sister's ear, she had begun to hammer on the table and had expressed a qualified assent. Therefore I had brought in all our hammers, one after another, but without avail. Then I bethought me of a crutch, the shape being much the same, and I borrowed one in the village and displayed it to my sister with considerable confidence. But she shook her head to that extent when she was shown it, that we were terrified lest in her weak and shattered state she should dislocate her neck. When my sister found that Biddy was very quick to understand her, this mysterious sign reappeared on the slate. Biddy looked thoughtfully at it, heard my explanation, looked thoughtfully at my sister, looked thoughtfully at Joe, who was always represented on the slate by his initial letter, and ran into the forge, followed by Joe and me. "Why, of course," cried Buddy, with an exultant face. "Don't you see? It's him!" Orlick, without a doubt. She had lost his name, and could only signify him by his hammer. We told him why we wanted him to come into the kitchen, and he slowly laid down his hammer, wiped his brow with his arm, took another wipe at it with his apron, and came slouching out with a curious loose vagabond bend in the knees that strongly distinguished him. I confess that I expected to see my sister denounce him, and that I was disappointed by the different result. She manifested the greatest anxiety to be on good terms with him, was evidently much pleased by his being at length produced, and motioned that she would have him given something to drink. She watched his countenance as if she were particularly wishful to be assured that he took kindly to his reception. She showed every possible desire to conciliate him, and there was an air of humble propitiation in all she did, such as I have seen pervade the bearing of a child toward a hard master. After that day, a day rarely passed without her drawing the hammer on her slate, and without Orlick slouching in and standing doggedly before her, as if he knew no more than I did what to make of it. Chapter 17. I just want to point out one thing that I noticed in this chapter is that he's no longer calling his sister Mrs. Joe. He's calling her his sister. I just thought that was interesting. So now we're on chapter 17. I now fell into a regular routine of apprenticeship life, which was varied beyond the limits of the village and the marshes by no more remarkable circumstance than the arrival of my birthday and my paying another visit to Miss Havisham. I found Miss Sarah Pocket still on duty at the gate. I found Miss Havisham just as I had left her, and she spoke of Estella in the very same way, if not in the very same words. The interview lasted but a few minutes, and she gave me a guinea when I was going, and told me to come again on my next birthday. I may mention at once that this became an annual custom. I tried to decline taking the guinea on the first occasion, but with no better effect than causing her to ask me very angrily if I expected more. Then, and after that, I took it. So unchanging was the dull old house, the yellow light in the darkened room, the faded spectre in the chair by the dressing-table glass, that I felt as if the stopping of the clocks had stopped time in that mysterious place, and while I and everything else outside it grew older, it still stood. Daylight never entered the house as to my thoughts and remembrances of it, any more than as to the actual fact. It bewildered me, and under its influence I continued at heart to hate my trade and to be ashamed of home. Imperceptibly I became conscious of a change in Biddy, however. Her shoes came up at the heel, her hair grew bright and neat, her hands were always clean. She was not beautiful, she was common, and could not be like Estella, but she was pleasant and wholesome and sweet-tempered. She had not been with us more than a year. I remember her being newly out of mourning at the time it struck me, when I observed to myself one evening that she had curiously thoughtful and attentive eyes, eyes that were very pretty and very good. It came of my lifting up my own eyes from a task I was poring at, writing some passages from a book to improve myself in two ways at once by a sort of stratagem, and seeing Biddy observant of what I was about. I laid down my pen, and Biddy stopped in her needlework without laying it down. "Biddy," said I, "how did you manage it? Either I am very stupid, or you are very clever." "What is it that I manage? I don't know," returned Biddy, smiling. She managed our whole domestic life, and wonderfully too, but I did not mean that, though that made what I did mean more surprising. "How do you manage, Biddy?" said I. "To learn everything that I learn, and always to keep up with me." I was beginning to be rather vain of my knowledge, for I spent my birthday guineas on it, and set aside the greater part of my pocket money for similar investment, though I have no doubt now that the little I knew was extremely dear at the price. "I might as well ask you," said Biddy, "how you manage." "No, because when I come in from the forge of the night, any one can see me turning to at it, but you never turn to at it, Biddy." "I suppose I must catch it like a cough," said Biddy quietly, and went on with her sewing. pursuing my idea as I leaned back in my wooden chair and looked at Biddy sewing away with her head on one side. I began to think her rather an extraordinary girl, for I called to mind now that she was equally accomplished in the terms of our trade and the names of our different sorts of work, and our various tools. In short, whatever I knew, Biddy knew. Theoretically, she was already as good a blacksmith as I, or better. "You are one of those, Biddy," said I, "who make the most of every chance. You never had a chance before you came here, and see how improved you are." Biddy looked at me for an instant, and went on with her sewing. "I was your first teacher, though, wasn't I?" said she, as she sewed. "Biddy!" I exclaimed in amazement. "Why, you're crying." "No, I'm not," said Biddy, looking up and laughing. "What put that in your head?" What could have put it in my head but the glistening of a tear as it dropped on her work? I sat silent, recalling what a drudge she had been until Mr. Wopsle's great aunt successfully overcame that bad habit of living, so highly desirable to be got rid of by some people. I recalled the hopeless circumstances by which she had been surrounded in the miserable little shop and the miserable little noisy evening school, with that miserable old bundle of incompetence always to be dragged and shouldered. I reflected that even in those untoward times there must have been latent in Biddy what was now developing, for in my first uneasiness and discontent I had turned to her for help, as a matter of course. Biddy sat quietly sewing, shedding no more tears, and while I looked at her and thought about it all, it occurred to me that perhaps I had not been sufficiently grateful to Biddy. I might have been too reserved, and should have patronized her more, though I did not use that precise word in my meditations, with my confidence. "Yes, Biddy," I observed, when I had done turning it over, "you were my first teacher, and that at a time when we thought little of ever being together like this in this kitchen." "Ah, poor thing," replied Biddy. It was like her self-forgetfulness to transfer the remark to my sister, and to get up and be busy about her, making her more comfortable. "That's sadly true." "Well," said I, "we must talk together a little more, as we used to do, and I must consult you a little more, as I used to do. Let us have a quiet walk on the marshes next Sunday, Biddy, and a long chat." My sister was never left alone now, but Joe more than readily undertook the care of her on that Sunday afternoon, and Biddy and I went out together. It was summertime and lovely weather. When we had passed the village and the church and the churchyard, and were out on the marshes and began to see the sails of the ships as they sailed on, I began to combine Miss Havisham and Estella with the prospect in my usual way. When we came to the riverside and sat down on the bank with the water rippling at our feet, making it all more quiet than it would have been without the sound, I resolved that it was a good time and place for the admission of Biddy into my inner confidence. "Biddy," said I, after binding her to secrecy, "I want to be a gentleman." "Oh, I wouldn't if I was you," she returned. "I don't think it would answer." "Biddy," said I, with some severity, "I have particular reasons for wanting to be a gentleman." "You know best, Pip, but don't you think you are happier as you are?" "Biddy," I exclaimed impatiently, "I am not at all happy as I am. I am disgusted with my calling and with my life. I have never taken to either since I was bound. Don't be absurd." "Was I absurd?" said Biddy, quietly raising her eyebrow. "I am sorry for that. I didn't mean to be. I only want you to do well and to be comfortable." "Well, then, understand once for all that I never shall or can be comfortable, or anything but miserable, there, Biddy, unless I can lead a very different sort of life from the life I lead now." "That's a pity," said Biddy, shaking her head with a sorrowful air. Now I, too, had so often thought it a pity that in the singular kind of quarrel with myself which I was always carrying on, I was half inclined to shed tears of vexation and distress when Biddy gave utterance to her sentiment and my own. I told her she was right, and I knew it was much to be regretted, but still it was not to be helped. If I could have settled down, I said to Biddy, plucking up the short grass within reach, much as I had once upon a time pulled my feelings out of my hair and kicked them into the brewery wall, if I could have settled down and been but half as fond of the forge as I was when I was little, I know it would have been much better for me. You and I and Joe would have wanted nothing then, and Joe and I would perhaps have gone partners when I was out of my time, and I might even have grown up to keep company with you, and we might have sat on this very bank on a fine Sunday, quite different people. I should have been good enough for you, shouldn't I, Biddy? Biddy sighed as she looked at the ship sailing on, and returned for answer, Yes, I am not over particular. It scarcely sounded flattering, but I knew she meant well. Instead of that, said I, plucking up more grass and chewing a blade or two, see how I am going on? Dissatisfied and uncomfortable, and what would it signify to me, being coarse and common, if nobody had told me so? Biddy turned her face suddenly toward mine, and looked far more attentively at me than she had looked at the sailing ships. It was neither a very true nor a very polite thing to say, she remarked, directing her eyes to the ships again. Who said it? I was disconcerted, for I had broken away without quite seeing where I was going to. It was not to be shuffled off now, however, and I answered, The beautiful young lady at Miss Havisham's, and she's more beautiful than anybody ever was, and I admire her dreadfully, and I want to be a gentleman on her account. Having made this lunatic confession, I began to throw my torn-up grass into the river, as if I had some thoughts of following it. Do you want to be a gentleman, to spite her, or to gain her over? Biddy quietly asked me after a pause. I don't know, I moodily answered. Because if it is to spite her, Biddy pursued, I should think, but you know best, that might be better and more independently done by caring nothing for her words. And if it is to gain her over, I should think, but you know best, she was not worth gaining over. Exactly what I myself had thought many times, exactly what was perfectly manifest to me at that moment, but how could I, a poor dazed village lad, avoid that wonderful inconsistency into which the best and wisest of men fall every day? It may be all quite true, said I to Biddy, but I admire her dreadfully. In short, I turned over on my face when I came to that, and got a good grasp on the hair on each side of my head, and wrenched it well, all the while knowing the madness of my heart to be so very mad and misplaced, that I was quite conscious it would have served my face right if I had lifted it up by my hair and knocked it against the pebbles as a punishment for belonging to such an idiot. Biddy was the wisest of girls, and she tried to reason no more with me. She put her hand, which was a comfortable hand, though roughened by work, upon my hands, one after another, and gently took them out of my hair. Then she softly patted my shoulder in a soothing way, while with my face upon my sleeve I cried a little, exactly as I had done in the brewery yard, and felt vaguely convinced that I was very much ill-used by somebody, or by everybody, I can't say which. I am glad of one thing, said Biddy, and that is that you have felt you could give me your confidence, Pip. And I am glad of another thing, and that is that of course you know you may depend upon my keeping it, and always so far deserving it. If your first teacher, dear such a poor one, and so much in need of being taught herself, had been your teacher at the present time, she thinks she knows what lesson she would set, but it would be a hard one to learn, and you have got beyond her, and it's of no use now. So with a quiet sigh for me, Biddy rose from the bank, and said with a fresh and pleasant change of voice, Shall we walk a little farther, or go home? Biddy, I cried, getting up and putting my arm around her neck and giving her a kiss, I shall always tell you everything. Till you're a gentleman, said Biddy. You know I never shall be, so that's always. Not that I have any occasion to tell you anything, for you know everything I know, as I told you at home the other night. Ah, said Biddy, quite in a whisper, as she looked away at the ships, and then repeated with her former pleasant change, shall we walk a little farther, or go home? I said to Biddy we would walk a little farther, and we did so, and the summer afternoon toned down into the summer evening, and it was very beautiful. I began to consider whether I was not more naturally and wholesomely situated, after all, in these circumstances, than playing beggar my neighbor by candlelight in the room with the stopped clocks, and being despised by Estella. I thought it would be very good for me if I could get her out of my head with all the rest of those remembrances and fancies, and could go to work determined to relish that I had to do, and stick to it, and make the best of it. I asked myself the question whether I did not surely know that if Estella were beside me at that moment instead of Biddy, she would make me miserable. I was obliged to admit that I did not know, or I did know it for certainty, and I said to myself, Pip, what a fool you are. We talked a good deal as we walked, and all that Biddy said seemed right. Biddy was never insulting or capricious, or Biddy today and somebody else tomorrow. She would have derived only pain and no pleasure from giving me pain. She would far rather have wounded her own breast than mine. How could it be, then, that I did not like her much the better of the two? Biddy, said I, when we were walking homeward, I wish you could put me right. I wish I could, said Biddy. If I could only get myself to fall in love with you. You don't mind my speaking so openly to such an old acquaintance. Oh, dear, not at all, said Biddy. Don't mind me. If I could only get myself to do it, that would be the thing for me. But you never will, you see, said Biddy. It did not appear quite so unlikely to me that evening as it would have done if we had discussed it a few hours before. I therefore observed I was not quite sure of that, but Biddy said she was, and she said it decisively. In my heart I believed her to be right, and yet I took it rather ill, too, that she should be so positive on the point. When we came near the churchyard, we had to cross an embankment and get over a stile near the sluice gate. There started up from the gate, or from the rushes, or from the ooze, which was quite in his stagnant way, old Orlick. "Hello," he growled. "Where are you two going?" Where should we be going but home?" "Well then," said he, "I'm jiggered if I don't see you home." This penalty of being jiggered was a favorite a favorite case of his life. He attached no definite meaning to the word that I am aware of, but used it, like his own pretended Christian name, to affront mankind and convey an idea of something savagely damaging. When I was younger, I had a general belief that if he had jiggered me personally, he would have done it with a sharp and twisted hook. Biddy was much against his going with us, and said to me in a whisper, "Don't let him come. I don't like him." As I did not like him either, I took the liberty of saying that we thanked him, but we didn't want seeing him. He received that piece of information with a yell of laughter and dropped back, but came slouching after us at a little distance. Curious to know whether Biddy suspected him of having had a hand in that murderous attack of which my sister had never been able to give any account, I asked her why she did not like him. "Oh," she replied, glancing over her shoulder as he slouched after us, "because I'm afraid he likes me." Did he ever tell you he liked you?" I asked indignantly. "No," said Biddy, glancing over her shoulder again. "He never told me so, but he dances at me whenever he can catch my eye." However novel and peculiar this testimony of attachment, I did not doubt the accuracy of the interpretation. I was very hot indeed upon old Orlick's daring to admire her, as hot as if it were an outrage on myself. But it makes no difference to you, you know, said Biddy calmly. No, Biddy, it makes no difference to me, only I don't like it. I don't approve it. Nor I neither, said Biddy, though that makes no difference to you. Exactly, said I, but I must tell you, I should have no opinion of you, Biddy, if he danced at you with your own consent. I kept an eye on Orlick after that night, and whenever circumstances were favorable to his dancing at Biddy, got before him to obscure that demonstration. He had struck root in Joe's establishment by reason of my sister's sudden fancy for him, or I should have tried to get him dismissed. He quite understood and reciprocated my good intentions, as I had reason to know thereafter. And now, because my mind was not confused enough before, I complicated its confusion 50,000-fold by having states and seasons when I was clear that Biddy was immeasurably better than Estella, and that the plain, honest, working life to which I was born had nothing in it to be ashamed of, but offered me sufficient means of self-respect and happiness. At those times, I would decide conclusively that my disaffection to dear old Joe and the forge was gone, and that I was growing up in a fair way to be partners with Joe and to keep company with Biddy, when all in a moment some confounding remembrance of the Havisham days would fall upon me like a destructive missile and scatter my wits again. Scattered wits take a long time picking up, and often before I had got them well together they would be dispersed in all directions by one stray thought, that perhaps after all Miss Havisham was going to make my fortune when my time was out. If my time had run out, it would have left me still at the height of my perplexities, I dare say. It never did run out, however, but was brought to a premature end as I proceed to relate. And that ends chapter 17. Next time we'll conclude volume 1. Obviously this is one volume, but it is the first act of this story. 18 and 19, and then after that, I guess these chapters are a little bit longer than what we had tonight. After that we have volume 2. So I hope that you're enjoying Great Expectations. I did read this a long time ago, but I don't remember everything that happens. So this is exciting for me to relive this, and I lost my page, to relive this story as well as you. I hope that you're enjoying it as much as I am. God bless. We'll see you next time. Good night.